Remember those classes where you swore you could feel time moving backwards?
Mm-hmm.
Not exactly the recipe for those aha moments we live for, right?
Definitely not.
I love digging into anything related to learning, and you sent over this fascinating excerpt from Teaching Human Beings at Work.
Yeah.
It really got me thinking about the difference between how we're traditionally taught and how we seem to learn best.
It's a disconnect that plays out in classrooms and workplaces every day, unfortunately.
Totally. And even though this book is geared towards workplace learning,
Mm-hmm.
so much of what it talks about feels applicable to anyone who wants to learn more effectively. So let's dive into it. One of the first things that jumped out at me was how the author talks about traditional teaching methods, like those marathon lectures,
Right.
often clashing with how our brains are actually wired.
It's true. Our brains aren't just empty containers waiting to be filled with facts. They're constantly changing, adapting, and creating new connections as we learn. That's neuroplasticity in action, the brain rewiring itself throughout our lives.
Okay, so our brains are more like those digital maps that reroute every time there's a traffic jam,
Yeah.
always adapting. But how does that actually work when we're trying to learn something new?
Imagine this. Each time you encounter new information, your brain cells or neurons form connections,
Okay.
like building tiny bridges between different pieces of information.
Okay.
The more you use those bridges through practice, application, and revisiting the information, the stronger and more established those connections become.
So it's like building a mental muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Exactly. But it's not just about rote memorization. Our brains also rely on something called chunking to organize information into manageable pieces. Think about trying to remember a phone number digit by digit versus breaking it down into smaller chunks. Which is easier?
Definitely chunks. Our brains love a good shortcut. It's way easier to remember my best friend's number as 555 Taco Tuesday than as a random string of digits.
Precisely. We create those chunks by actively engaging with information, making sense of it, connecting it to what we already know, and crucially, using it.
Mm-hmm.
Which brings us to a point the book emphasizes. The difference between simply knowing something and actually being able to put it into practice.
It's that easier said than done gap, right? It's like knowing you should eat your vegetables, it doesn't mean you're reaching for the broccoli every time.
Right, exactly.
We can understand a concept in theory, but actually applying it, that's where things get tricky.
And that's where deliberate practice comes in. It's not enough to just passively absorb information. We need to actively apply it, experiment with it, make mistakes, and learn from those mistakes. That's how those neural pathways become truly ingrained.
The book actually had a really cool example of this in action. They talked about Carpetright, the company that started using these short videos made by their top-performing salespeople to help other employees improve their sales techniques.
It's a fantastic example of deliberate practice in a real-world context. Instead of just talking about sales strategies in the abstract, Carpetright made it about showing, not just telling.
Exactly. But all this talk about brains working overtime makes me want to take a nap. Speaking of which, you mentioned sleep earlier.
Oh, yeah.
What role does catching those zizzies play in all of this?
Sleep is absolutely crucial for learning. While you're resting, your brain is hard at work, consolidating memories, strengthening those neural connections we talked about, and essentially cleaning house.
So it's like hitting the save button on your computer after a long day of work. You're letting your brain back up all that important data.
I like that analogy. And it's one of the reasons why pulling all-nighters to cram for a test is actually counterproductive. You're depriving your brain of the time it needs to solidify those memories.
That actually makes me feel a little better about all those times I nodded off during a lecture.
Yeah.
Maybe my brain was just trying to tell me it needed a break.
Right.
But you know what really makes my eyes glaze over? It's that feeling of being intellectually force-fed. When you're bombarded with information without any real chance to engage with it or apply it, it's like someone trying to cram an entire encyclopedia into your head at once. Overwhelming.
There's a reason that image comes to mind. It's like force-feeding a goose to make foie gras. The process just isn't designed with the recipient's well-being in mind.
Okay, that's a little disturbing.
Yeah, a little bit.
But I see your point, and the book actually argues against this more is better approach to learning.
It's about quality over quantity. It's like the difference between savoring a fine wine and chugging it down.
Yeah.
You might consume the same amount, but the experience and what you take away from it is completely different.
It's like the difference between trying to speed read a novel versus taking your time to really savor the language, the characters, the story.
Exactly. When we're bombarded with too much information, It's harder for our brains to process it effectively and make those meaningful connections.
It makes you wonder about countries like Finland, which consistently rank among the top education systems in the world, despite having shorter school hours, no homework, and a greater emphasis on letting kids just be kids.
Hmm.
It's a very different approach than the pressure cooker environment many of us grew up with.
And yet, Finnish students consistently outperform those in countries that emphasize longer hours
Mm-hmm.
and more homework.
Mm-hmm.
It's a testament to the idea that quality learning experiences, ones that respect how our brains naturally learn, can be incredibly powerful.
It really makes you question the whole one-size-fits-all approach to education. We wouldn't expect everyone to learn to play the piano at the same pace or in the same way.
Right.
So why do we assume everyone learns best from a standardized curriculum and teaching style?
It's a valid question. Just like our bodies come in different shapes and sizes, so do our brains. Trying to force everyone into the same mold ignores those individual differences in learning styles, strengths, and paces. It's like trying to fit square pegs into round holes.
Yeah, exactly.
And speaking of things that don't quite fit, let's talk about those endless lectures. You know, the ones where you're fighting boredom while simultaneously developing carpal tunnel from frantic note-taking.
Don't even get me started on the spiral notebook of doom. I swear I lost more brain cells to those things than to any all-nighter.
Right.
But seriously, is it just me, or does traditional frontal teaching seem specifically designed to make you forget everything the second you leave the room?
There's a reason for that. Remember how we talked about our brains being wired for focused attention, but only in short bursts?
Yeah.
Trying to absorb information passively for long periods goes against our natural wiring. It's like trying to fill a leaky bucket.
Some of it might stay put, but a lot of it inevitably ends up spilling out. That's a great way to put it. And you know what else the book talks about? The power of engaging multiple senses and emotions when it comes to making learning stick. It's like those learning experiences that really stay with you, they usually involve more than just someone talking at you.
Absolutely. When we can tap into multiple senses and emotions, it's like hitting the fast-forward button on learning. Think about your most memorable learning experiences.
Hmm.
Chances are they involve some combination of hands-on activities, visual aids, maybe even humor or storytelling.
Oh, totally. I still remember my high school chemistry teacher who used boiled eggs and sausages to demonstrate chemical bonds.
Dang. You remember it vividly because it was engaging and unexpected. It probably even evoked an emotional response.
It was definitely memorable and a little bit weird. But it's funny how those quirky, engaging experiences can make a concept stick in a way that no textbook ever could.
It makes perfect sense, neurologically speaking. Our brains are wired to pay attention to novelty, to the unexpected, to anything that evokes an emotional response.
So you're saying we should be incorporating more boiled sausages into the classroom?
Well, I don't know about that,
I'm not sure about that.
but I get your point.
Okay.
Speaking of things that might need a rethink, let's talk about grades. I'm still on the fence about whether they're truly motivating or just a giant stress factor.
Yeah.
There's a growing body of evidence suggesting that traditional grading systems can actually do more harm than good, especially when it comes to intrinsic motivation, that innate desire to learn for the sheer joy of learning.
Because when you're laser focused on getting good grades, you might miss out on the actual learning process.
Exactly. And that fear of failure can actually create a stress response in the brain that makes it harder to focus, think critically, and retain information. It's like trying to learn a new dance move when you're terrified of someone watching and judging you, not exactly conducive to letting loose and mastering the steps.
So what's the alternative? How do we move away from traditional grades while still providing meaningful feedback, which I think we can all agree is important?
It's about shifting the focus from evaluation to growth. Instead of assigning arbitrary grades, imagine a system that provides specific, actionable feedback that helps learners understand their strengths, identify areas for improvement, and track their own progress over time.
So it's like the difference between saying you got a B+ on that project and saying your writing is strong, but I think you could strengthen your argument by providing more supporting evidence. One is a label, the other is a roadmap for improvement.
Precisely. It's about giving learners the tools and agency to become active participants in their own learning journeys.
Which actually ties into another important point, building positive learning habits that extend beyond the classroom or the workplace. Learning doesn't end when you graduate or finish a training program, right?
Absolutely. It's an ongoing process that requires us to be adaptable, curious, and willing to continuously learn and evolve.
Okay, so give me the cheat sheet. What do those positive learning habits actually look like in practice?
Well, it starts with recognizing that learning isn't just about passively absorbing information, but about actively engaging with it, making connections, experimenting, and yes, even making mistakes and learning from them.
It's like that old saying, we learn from our mistakes.
Yeah,
But it's not just about making mistakes, it's about creating an environment where it's safe to do so, right?
absolutely.
Where those oops moments are seen as opportunities for growth rather than something to be feared.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like you're not really fluent until you've thoroughly embarrassed yourself trying to order a coffee in a foreign country.
Right. Exactly.
But seriously, what else can we do to cultivate those positive learning habits you were talking about?
Well, it's also about building routines and rituals that support learning. Setting aside dedicated time for focused study, breaking down large tasks into smaller, more manageable chunks, even incorporating regular breaks to avoid burnout. It's about finding what works best for you and being consistent.
So it's like training for a marathon. Consistency and pacing are key, but instead of building physical endurance, we're strengthening those mental muscles.
Precisely. And, all this talk about learning habits made me think about something else the book touched on, the importance of skills like collaboration, critical thinking, and problem solving.
Mm-hmm.
These are skills that are becoming more and more valuable, especially in a world where technology is changing so rapidly.
It's like those uniquely human skills that robots haven't quite mastered yet, but those aren't things that are typically emphasized in traditional education models, are they?
You're right, they often are not. But the good news is that these skills can be developed and honed, just like any other skill, through practice and by creating opportunities for learners to apply them in meaningful ways.
So instead of just telling students about the importance of teamwork, we should be giving them projects that actually require them to work together.
Exactly. And instead of simply lecturing about critical thinking, what if we present students with challenges that encourage them to question assumptions, analyze information from different angles, and draw their own conclusion?
It's about creating those aha moments through experience
Yeah.
rather than just lecturing at people. Give someone a fish and you feed them for a day, teach someone to fish, and
You equip them with a valuable skill that they can use for a lifetime.
exactly. When you think about it that way, it's amazing how much potential there is to transform the way we approach learning. It's about so much more than just memorizing facts and figures.
Right.
It's about cultivating curiosity, embracing challenges, and fostering a lifelong love of learning.
And recognizing that learning isn't a linear, one-size-fits-all process. It's an ongoing journey, and we're all works in progress.
Well said. So, to wrap things up, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the neuroscience of how our brains learn best to the importance of creating engaging, effective learning experiences. What's the most important thing you hope our listener takes away from all of this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that we all have the capacity to become more effective learners, regardless of our age, background, or learning style.
Hmm.
By understanding how our brains are wired to learn, and by adopting strategies that align with those natural processes, we can unlock our full learning potential.
It's about embracing that growth mindset, that belief that we can always learn and grow. And, after diving into this book with you, I'm feeling pretty inspired. I might even be ready to tackle that stack of books on my nightstand that's been gathering dust.
That's what it's all about.
Oh.
And who knows, maybe you'll discover your next aha moment in those pages.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on this deep dive. It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
The pleasure was all mine. And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this journey into the fascinating world of how we learn. We hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and given you some new tools to become a more effective, engaged, and empowered learner.